Senator John Cornyn, thank you so much, and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Good to be with you, Jack.
So, as President-elect Trump takes office for his second term, there seems to be some disagreement, I've read, between Republicans about how to pass the president-elect's agenda as quickly as possible. He has said he wants, quote, one beautiful bill, and Senate Republicans say two bills are actually better. Where do you fall on this, and what exactly would be included in this bill, in bill or bills?
Well, Jack, it's a very exciting time. The American people voted for a different direction for the country, and we're all eager to get to work. And I know nobody is more eager than President Trump. And we've been having hearings on his cabinet, as you know, and hopefully we'll have a number of those ready on day one. But um, as far as your question is concerned, I'm agnostic really on whether it's one bill or two bills. I don't think most people get too bogged down in the procedure outside of the Capitol. But the goal is to make sure we avoid a multi-trillion-dollar tax increase, which will occur if we do nothing, if we're unsuccessful. Plus, we also need to deal with our national debt. I've been here a while and we keep talking about it, and people say, well, somebody ought to do something. Well, we're the people who are in a position to actually begin to chip away at that. So passing a budget resolution is the first step, and then getting the various committees of the House and the Senate together to meet those reconciliation instructions, as they're called, to deal with the huge tax increase potential, and then also to deal with some of the excessive spending that's caused us a lot of problems.
And I hear your point as far as, procedure and, people get wrapped up in that.
Yeah,
But the bottom line is that the pressure is on the Republicans to deliver. Isn't that right?
no question, no question. Yeah, I don't mean to minimize the differences of points of view, but as you know, there are 450 members of the House and 100 members of the Senate, and then the White House, the president's still ramping up his team. So as soon as we can get the consensus on the best approach forward, it seems to me that Speaker Johnson and Jason Smith, who heads the tax writing committee in the House, and the president are all on the same page. The Senate still is sort of talking about two bills, and I think the sooner we can get on the same page, the sooner we can get down to work.
What executive orders are you expecting from Mr. Trump when he takes office on the first few days? I know that Senate Republicans met with him recently, and so what do you see coming?
Well, I think the border is going to be job number one, and nobody knows better than Texans about the tragedy of the last 4 years, the public health and public safety dangers of the open borders policies of the Biden administration. A lot of that was a result of President Biden going in and systematically dismantling the executive orders that President Trump had put in during his term of office. So I expect President Trump to consider and sign as many as 100 different executive orders on day one. A lot of those will reverse the Biden-Harris policies on the border. And then we're going to need to ramp up the ICE, for example, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that has to deal with people who are here illegally, and also detention facilities, which are going to be important. And has reestablished deterrence when it comes to people coming to the border. So I think that's going to be the emphasis, but there's going to be 100 of them, I think, and so they're going to cover a lot of different subject matters.
Do you expect Texas to be ground zero for detention centers?
I do. I do. Well, it just makes sense. As you know, people are coming literally from all over the world. This is not the sort of illegal immigration patterns that we've seen historically, where poor people who want a job, want to work, come to the United States and to be able to earn something and send it back home. Literally, people are traveling from around the world. These networks of these criminal organizations that facilitate that, and also the policies of the Biden administration simply releasing people into the interior of the United States, many of whom never report for their immigration court hearing dates. And because of the backlogs, many of those court hearing dates are years off, even a decade off or more. So I expect that to change rather dramatically, and President Trump's relationship with, for example, Mexico, the Remain in Mexico policy, which has proved very effective during his first term, I expect to see that reestablished.
And as far as executive orders, I mean, executive orders are at the whim of the president.
Right.
How much pressure is there going to be on Republicans in Congress to take those executive orders and then codify them?
Well, that's an important point, and I think there's going to be a lot of interest in that because, as you point out, one president can sign an executive order, the next president can rescind those executive orders, and but they can't do that with statutes and laws that Congress passes. But as you know, Speaker Johnson has a very thin margin in the House, and it's going to be up to the House to see what they can pass. We have 53 Republicans in the Senate, or we will when we're fully up to speed. I saw Governor DeSantis just uh, uh, appointed a new senator from Florida once Marco Rubio steps down. J.D. Vance, the vice president elect, has stepped down already. So Governor DeWine in Ohio will soon be appointing a new senator from Ohio. So once we're up to speed, we'll have 53 Republicans in the Senate. And I believe that whatever the House can pass, whatever that is, I think we'll be in good shape here in the Senate to be able to pass it and send it to President Trump.
I want to ask you about the Laken Riley Act, which is coming up for a vote. You passed an amendment to that bill this week, and tell me about it and how that amendment fits into the broader bill.
Well, Laken Riley, as you know, is a young woman who was murdered by a illegal immigrant, somebody who never should have been in the country in the first place. And the Laken Riley Act is, of course, named after her, and categorizes a number of crimes as priorities for deportation if these illegal immigrants have committed these crimes. Of course, none of them have a right to be in the country, but you got to start somewhere. The amendment I introduced, and which passed overwhelmingly, said that if you assault a police officer, that you should be deported. I think it's common sense. It's shocking to me that 25 Democrats voted against that, but that's part of, I guess those are the 25 who didn't learn anything from the November 5th election. But I'm glad it passed. I expect we will send this to President Trump's desk and he will sign it into law shortly after he is sworn in.
You brought up before about extending the Trump tax cuts from 2017. And I know one of the things that has been talked about is that would help people, I guess, up in the northern states is, how much what's the limit, raising the limit on how much people can write off on their property taxes.
Right.
But we've seen property taxes in Texas go up dramatically because of rising property values. So where are you on raising that limit?
Well, as you know, Texas is blessed not to have a state income tax, but many of the states do, and particularly the most populated states up north and in the West, California and New York, for example. And historically, they've been able to deduct from their federal income tax all of their state taxes. We capped that at $10,000 in 2017. I know some of the elected representatives in the House, again, where they have a very thin majority, are insisting that that cap be raised. And I know President Trump has said, come back to me with a reasonable recommendation. So I suspect that that will be changed somewhat, but I think it's fundamentally unfair to have Texans subsidize the high taxes in some of these blue states like New York and California, which a removal of the cap would do. So having a cap at $10,000 or somewhere in that area, I think is a fair compromise.
And the other question that comes up when we talk about tax cuts is, I know they're called pay-fors on Capitol Hill, but the question does arise, how would this be paid for? Because even though we're talking about people keeping their own money, it still has to fit within a budget. So what are the items being considered right now?
Well, you're right to identify the problem with our national debt. I don't believe it's because people are undertaxed. I think the problem is the federal government simply is spending way too much money. Um, I don't think we should have to pay for current policy, which is an extension of the existing tax provisions. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't look for savings elsewhere. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, of course, have the Department of Government Efficiency. I think we'll have some interesting recommendations coming out of there. But the federal government largely operates on autopilot when it comes to spending. Those are mandatory spending programs and some of the provisions of the tax code. And I think we need to look at all of those. And we will look at all of those as part of the budget process. And I believe we need to start chipping away at them. We need to figure out what are our priorities as a nation. And I believe national security should be job number one. Some of these other things are maybe we would like to be able to do, but maybe they aren't priorities, or we shouldn't be doing it at all. So I think it's a generational opportunity to look at all of the spending that the federal government does and to reduce some of the excessive spending, much of which I think stimulated the incredible inflation that we've experienced, 40-year high inflation, because the federal government simply been pouring gasoline on the fire. So I'm very excited about the opportunities. Like I said, I think it's a once in a generational opportunity to deal with some of these very hard problems, but I'm up for it and eager to get started.
You mentioned Trump's nominees for his cabinet, and you've been pushing hard for them to be approved, confirmed by the Senate, particularly the three Texans. And I'm wondering, early on, I saw on social media grassroots conservatives trying to pressure you, and I'm wondering, has your decision been influenced by that pressure at all?
I don't consider it pressure. I consider it input. Am honored to represent a state of more than 30 million people. We have 1,600 people a day moving into Texas. Obviously, I try to represent them the best I can. And I think part of the reason, part of what they want me to do, my constituents want me to do, is exercise my judgment. And and so I try to do that, and I certainly listen to the input, but I don't consider it pressure. I consider it the right of my constituents to express themselves, and certainly I try to listen.
But you're behind these nominees firmly, and you think all of them will be approved?
That's what it looks like right now. Some of the nominees do not have yet completed FBI background checks, and some of them haven't been through the ethics paperwork. But I'm glad to see people like Brooke Rollins will be up for her hearing as the agriculture, the head of the Department of Agriculture, Secretary of Agriculture, on this 23rd. And John Ratcliffe, as you pointed out, Scott Turner at HUD. It's great to have those Texans serving in President Trump's cabinet. So I'm optimistic we'll get the president's team on board. I think he's entitled to a certain amount of deference when it comes to his team. He won an election, and I think he needs to have the folks around him that can allow him to actually do what he promised to do during the campaign.
Are you still committed to running for re-election next year? And if so, how concerned are you about the potential for Attorney General Ken Paxton to challenge you?
I am going to run for reelection. I love my job. I think it's helpful to Texas and Texans to have somebody who has experience dealing with Washington, who's been effective, as I have tried to be, on their behalf. And look, Jack, I've run in a lot of elections, and I've always had primary opponents. The last time I had a primary was I won by 76%. So that goes with the territory. I'm not concerned about it. And it's a free country. Anybody who wants to run can.
CBS News is reporting that Texas border czar Mike Banks is going to be named U.S. Border Patrol chief. What do you know about that, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I know Mike, and of course, he's been the border czar for Governor Abbott, and he's got a long career in the Border Patrol itself. And I can't think of anybody better to do the job. I think it's an inspired choice. Texas has about a 1,200-mile border with Mexico. Not every piece of the border, like Arizona and California, are the same, but Mike is intimately familiar with conditions on the Texas border. And as I said earlier on, I expect these executive orders that President Trump will sign on day one to many of them to deal with the border and to finally do what should have been done before, which is to secure the border and restore some integrity to the process. We are the most generous country in the world when it comes to legal immigration, and I think that should continue. But having these open border policies has been a disaster for public safety and public health. And I think Mike is going to be a really important addition to the team.
You've also put your support behind an effort to rename the Dallas VA Medical Center after the late Congresswoman from Dallas, Eddie Bernice Johnson. Why is that important to you?
Well, what I usually do every time we have an election, the new members of Congress who come in, I usually visit with them and say, look, I think there may be a lot of things we disagree about, but I'm interested in things that you're interested in that we can agree on. And so when I met with Jasmine Crockett, who succeeded Eddie Bernice Johnson, we had that conversation. And so Jasmine had this idea, which I thought was a pretty good one. Eddie Bernice Johnson served with distinction for many years in the House of Representatives, and I think this is an appropriate tribute to her service.
And my last question to you, Senator, is you've also proposed a bill that would give reciprocity in all 50 states if people had a concealed gun license. Tell me a little bit about that, and how confident are you that you would get 60 votes needed in the Senate?
Well, Jack, if you want to drive anywhere else in the country, you can do that on a Texas driver's license. And this is basically the same thing. There's a lot of bilateral reciprocity, in other words, state-to-state reciprocity for firearms. If you get a license in one state, it's honored in another state, but that's not true everywhere. And there are a number of stories about people being caught unawares, inadvertently, traveling across state lines and being arrested and prosecuted for violating those state laws. So this essentially is like a driver's license for the Second Amendment. And I've always said that law-abiding citizens are not a threat to public safety, and the Second Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights and a constitutional guarantee. And so I think this is a common sense way to avoid the gotchas for law-abiding people who inadvertently are traveling across state lines. So consider it like a driver's license.
Senator John Cornyn, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack. Good to be with you.
All right, Senator, thank